Chapter 13: Low Fat, Low Cholesterol Confusion. Sugar-laden muffins, nutritionally neutered toast, and insulin-exploding juice are touted as part of a balanced, nutritious breakfast because they're low in fat. We look at any food and ask ourselves, is this low in fat? If the answer is yes, we think it's healthy. Yet foods that contain fat are not necessarily unhealthy. Most researchers today agree that our total fat intake is not a risk factor for cardiovascular disease or cancer. But don't low-fat diets help us lose weight? The Harvard School of Public Health strongly disagrees. In their words, the low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet recommended by the USDA Food Guide Pyramid may be among the worst eating strategies for someone who is overweight. People on low-fat diets generally lose about 2 to 4 pounds after several weeks, but then gain that weight back even while continuing with the diet. Randomized trials of weight loss show little weight changes after a year. Foods containing fat do not make you fat, but you've been led to think so because a gram of fat contains more calories than a gram of carbohydrate or protein. Fat has 9 calories per gram, while protein and carbohydrate only have 4. But as you've learned in earlier chapters, calories are not the primary issue. Fat's higher quantity of calories does not mean that eating fat causes you to store body fat. That thinking is rooted in the calorie counting theory, which you now know is wrong. International cholesterol expert Ufi Ravenskov, MD, PhD, puts it well. The idea that you become fat by eating fat is just as silly as to say that you become green by eating green vegetables. According to the National Academy of Sciences, Harvard Medical School, Harvard School of Public Health, and dozens of other well-respected medical organizations, obesity itself is not associated with dietary fat in either national or international studies. No solid evidence proves that dietary fat or percentage of calories from fat causes weight gain. There's even evidence that lower fat intake correlates with higher obesity rates. This evidence seems counterintuitive because you've been led to believe that eating whole food fats encourages overeating. Sadly, you've been misinformed. Think back to satiety. Water, fiber, and protein play the biggest role in the satiety of food, and satiety is what determines how many calories we eat. Notice how there is no mention of fat there. Many water, fiber, and protein-packed foods contain fat. For example, seafood, meat, eggs, nuts, and seeds all contain a lot of fat. But when we focus on eating less fat, we replace these high satiety foods with low satiety but low fat starches and sweets. Since low satiety foods require more calories to fill us up, this swap causes you to eat more, not fewer calories. So far from discouraging overeating, avoiding sane foods that contain fat encourages overeating and hormonal clogging. The last 4 decades of data tell the same story. We were told to avoid eating fat, so we reduced our relative intake of fat and increased our intake of starches and sweets, and we were less satisfied. To deal with our increased hunger, we did increase our total insane caloric intake and therefore ended up heavier and sicker, albeit only a tiny fraction heavier relative to what we should have gained thanks to our set point. The government knows this too. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, reported, during 1971 to 2000, a statistically significant increase in average energy intake occurred. This increase in energy intake is attributable primarily to an increase in carbohydrate intake. Even the authors of the government's guidelines, the U.S. Department of Agriculture or USDA, have gone on record stating that since the 1970s, the major dietary trend has been a greatly increased consumption of carbohydrates. They found that starch consumption has increased by nearly 60 pounds per person per year, and that sweetener consumption has increased by nearly 30 pounds. That's 90 additional pounds of low quality, insane, low satiety food per person every year. In the USDA's dietary reference intakes for energy, carbohydrate, fiber, fat, fatty acids, cholesterol, protein, and amino acids, the document on which all government and related organizations base their nutrition practices, the government acknowledges, compared to higher fat intakes, low fat, high carbohydrate diets may modify the metabolic profile in ways that are considered to be unfavorable with respect to chronic disease such as coronary heart disease and diabetes. This metabolic pattern has been associated with increased risk for coronary heart disease and type 2 diabetes in sedentary populations such as that of the United States, where overweight and obesity are common. High carbohydrate, low fat diets induce changes in lipoprotein and glucose/insulin metabolism in ways that could raise the risk for chronic disease. So, if the USDA recognizes that low fat, high carb is linked to everything we're trying to avoid, why do they continue to recommend it to us? New York University researchers remind us of the sad fact that dietary guidelines necessarily are political compromises between what science tells us about nutrition and health and what is good for the food industry. The emphasis on low fat leads away from eating sane whole foods and misses an important point. Long-term health and fat loss do not result from diets low in fat, carbohydrate, or protein. Fat is not evil. Carbohydrates are not bad, and protein is not dangerous. The best way to burn body fat is to be balanced and sane. However, when you look at the government's pyramid and plate, balance is nowhere to be found. Both the Food Guide Pyramid as well as My Plate recommend a 65% carbohydrate diet with about 20% fat and 15% protein. How is this a balanced diet? They are extremely high in carbohydrate and low in everything else. In fact, consider the high-fat Atkins diet. It is called high-fat because it advises individuals to get 65% of their calories from fat. Now look at the USDA's pyramid and plate diets that advise us to get 65% of our calories from carbohydrate. Doesn't that make them high carbohydrate diets? Maybe this is why USA Today poked fun at the 72% of Americans who claim to eat a balanced diet. The implication: how could 70% of you be overweight if you ate a balanced diet? We could easily be overweight if the balanced diet we were told to eat by the government is actually wildly out of balance. This imbalance exists in other guidelines as well. The American Heart Association Nutrition Committee refers to a diet consisting of 40% carbohydrate, 30% fat, and 30% protein as a low carbohydrate, very high protein diet. Since when does 40-30-30 ratio indicate that anything is very high? If a diet gets 30% of its calories from protein and 40% of its calories from carbohydrate, how is that a low carbohydrate and very high protein diet? Common sense, as well as basic algebra, seem to suggest that 40-30-30 is a pretty balanced ratio. But what could be the reason for this confusion? The answer lies in another myth that has been proved false. Eating foods that contain fat leads to unhealthy cholesterol levels. The fact is that eating the right kinds of whole food fats is the key to improving your cholesterol. New heading: Whole food fat helps cholesterol. As with other popular misconceptions about how your body works, confusion runs rampant about the word cholesterol. Ancel Keys played an important role in creating this problem. Along with his other claims, he needed a scientific sounding explanation for how foods containing fat kill us. Looking at his data, Keys noticed that people eating more foods that contain fat generally had higher total cholesterol. While there was, and still is, no proof that high total cholesterol causes cardiovascular issues, Keys called it the cause of their heart problems. Even while Keys was touting his new findings, the Federal Register, the official log of the federal government of the United States, was on record with the true scientific data at that time. The role of cholesterol in heart disease has not been established. A causal relationship between blood cholesterol levels and these diseases has not been proved. The advisability of making extensive changes in the nature of dietary fat intake of the people of this country has not been demonstrated. Likewise, to this day, no studies have proven high total cholesterol causes heart disease. The American Journal of Medicine reported total cholesterol per se is not a risk factor for coronary heart disease at all. Researcher Ufi Ravenskov, MD, PhD, analyzed 26 randomized controlled trials, which were designed to lower total cholesterol and, theoretically, the risk of heart disease and of death from heart disease. Ravenskov's analysis divided people into two groups. 1. Treatment group: people who ate less food that contains fat and or took cholesterol-lowering drugs. 2. Control group: people who did not eat less food that contains fat and did not take cholesterol-lowering drugs. Across the studies, the total number of heart attack deaths were equal across the groups, and during the period of the trials, more people died overall in the group who ate less fat and or took cholesterol-lowering drugs. Ravenskov concluded, lowering serum cholesterol concentrations does not reduce mortality and is unlikely to prevent coronary heart disease. To prove that our government's dietary recommendations are helpful, 3 points must be proved. 1. Eating natural foods that contain fat leads to risky cholesterol levels. 2. These levels of cholesterol cause heart disease. 3. The diet outlined by the government's guidelines improves these cholesterol levels. None of these things have been proved. Eating whole foods containing fat has never been proved to lead to risky levels of cholesterol. The effect of natural dietary fat on cholesterol has never been proved to cause heart disease. Studies have actually shown just the opposite. The high-starch, low-fat, low-protein diet promoted by the government's guidelines has been proven to worsen the type of cholesterol, high-density lipoprotein, HDL, that decreases the risk of heart disease. For example, a 2009 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine went so far as to call HDL cholesterol a biomarker for dietary carbohydrate. In other words, the more low-fat, starch and sweet-based carbohydrate we eat, the lower our levels of the type of cholesterol that is crucial to heart health. Here is where the confusion about cholesterol comes up. There are different types of cholesterol, and most of them are helpful or neutral. The two most commonly discussed are LDL, low-density lipoprotein, and HDL, high density lipoprotein. They are both required to produce new cells and hormones, and because of this critical role, even if we never ate any cholesterol, our liver or intestines would produce it as our body works to keep us in balance. Much like unhealthy levels of body fat indicate a disorder in automatic energy balance, and unhealthy levels of blood sugar indicate a disorder in automatic insulin balance, unhealthy levels of cholesterol indicate a disorder in automatic lipoprotein balance. When it comes to predicting heart health, the American Heart Association, the International Diabetes Federation, and the World Health Organization all agree that low HDL cholesterol, not high LDL cholesterol, is what matters. Looking at disease and death rates at various levels of LDL and HDL cholesterol, researchers have found that people with low HDL cholesterol run a much greater risk of heart disease. What might be most impactful about this discovery is the irrelevance of total cholesterol. For instance, if somebody told you their total cholesterol is 185, what is their risk of heart disease? It's either very low or high, depending on how much of that 185 consists of HDL cholesterol. For instance, a total cholesterol of 185, where 85 milligrams are coming from HDL and 100 milligrams are coming from LDL, would indicate a heroically healthy heart. Now consider a total cholesterol of 185, where only 25 milligrams are coming from HDL and 160 are coming from LDL. This represents a very unhealthy heart. Same total cholesterol level, very different levels of heart health. This data suggests that we would be much healthier if we stopped thinking about our total cholesterol and instead focused on increasing our HDL cholesterol. Higher HDL cholesterol protects you from heart problems more than dropping LDL cholesterol ever could. Heart healthy diets are not about lowering total cholesterol. They're about raising HDL cholesterol. The most effective way to raise your HDL levels through diet is to eat more whole food fats in place of insane starch. Whole food fat raises HDL. Insane starch lowers HDL. More specifically, unsaturated fats, such as the fats found in most plants, seafood, and white meat, increase HDL and lower LDL. That's great. Saturated fats found in coconut, cacao, cocoa, dark meat, and red meat increase HDL levels and also slightly increase LDL levels. That's still great. Now, starches and sweets drop both HDL and LDL, which isn't doing any favors for your heart. Since lower HDL does more harm than lower LDL does good, any diet that tells you to replace sane sources of fat with insane starch worsens your cholesterol. That's why many experts, from researchers at Harvard to scientists reporting in the Journal of the American Medical Association, believe our focus on eradicating fats, especially saturated fat, to try to reduce our LDL and total cholesterol may not just have failed to reduce heart disease risk, it may have actually increased it, along with decreasing our health, weakening our blood sugar control, and increasing the prevalence of insulin resistance as well as obesity. Even saturated fat, about which so much has been said, are not cholesterol criminals. The American Heart Association found that no well designed randomized control study in the general population has shown that lowering saturated fat intake significantly decreases your risk of coronary heart disease mortality. Let's also keep in mind the critical benefits of whole food fats. Our bodies can't make much use of vitamins A, D, E, K, and quite a few other helpful substances unless we eat fats. This is why your multivitamin instructs you to take with a meal. The manufacturers are hoping your pill will find some natural fats to help the vitamins get where they need to go. Dietary fat also plays a critical role in cell and hormone production as well as brain function. In fact, certain saturated fats, known as medium chain triglycerides, such as those found in coconuts, and polyunsaturated fats, known as omega 3 fatty acids, such as those found in fish, flaxseed, other seafoods, chia seeds, and grass fed beef, are especially helpful for heart and brain health and have been shown to help us burn body fat. We should see these whole food fats as health foods rather than the cause of arterial clogs. Please disregard the performances on commercials and talk shows that demonstrate that saturated fats are solid at room temperature and tell you that this is why they get clogged in your arteries. By that logic, spinach, broccoli, and all other vegetables also should get clogged in your arteries as they too are solid at room temperature. You know the cause of clogs. They do not come from whole food fats. They come from starches and sweets. The Journal of the American Medical Association summarized the science beautifully. The proportion of total energy from fat appears largely unrelated to risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, or obesity. Saturated fat targeted by nearly all nutrition related professional organizations and governmental agencies has little relation to heart disease within most prevailing dietary patterns. What's the bottom line? The overwhelming evidence shows that any diet telling you to replace sane whole food fat with insane dry, low fiber, and low water starches is unhealthy and fattening. Sadly, the government's diet tells you to do exactly what science says you should avoid. And if you think that is troubling, wait until you see what happened when big business jumped onto the government bogus dietary guidance bandwagon.